Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, first question. If the last 5 reps are all that cause muscular adaptation, why does greasing the groove work? Is this purely due to neuromuscular efficiency, or is there something else going on here? Good question. Well, people need to remember a lot of times, let's say someone is fairly new to training. If you're relatively new to training, then something like this is actually going to be sometimes within the last 5 reps. In other words, if you're only capable of doing 5 pull-ups or 3 pull-ups and you come in and do 1 every day, you are getting an actual training response. And so people need to remember, greasing the groove is you're coming in and you're doing no more than half of your max reps on pull-ups or chin-ups or something like that multiple times a day spread out throughout the day. But what you need to also remember is that this carries over to you actually doing work later. In other words, if you're a ranked novice or someone who's detrained, you're going to gain muscle from this. You're going to gain muscle. But what you're also looking at is, for us, let's say someone does this who's a little more advanced. No, you're training a motor pattern. You're burning calories. You're possibly re-sparking some muscle protein synthesis from your previous workouts, right? That's what's going on for someone who's a little more advanced. It's the way that we would think of as like what some people call feeder workouts. I think what Rich Piana used to call them that. The idea of doing a lighter work in between your bigger sessions just to re-stimulate some of the previous adaptation. And the big thing that we're looking at here was something like greasing the groove for pull-ups or dips or anything else like that. You are training a motor pattern. That neuromuscular efficiency by you training the pattern over and over and over is going to carry over to your main lifts. It's going to make you a little better at them. It's possibly going to increase your strength slightly. So what you're doing there is doing it that way and greasing the groove of the movement pattern, right? So that is a big part of it, the neuromuscular part, because you're doing it multiple times a day. But since it's not taxing enough to cause much, if any, adaptation, it also doesn't impact recovery. In other words, if you can do 12 pull-ups, to come in and do 5 or 6 multiple times every day is not going to cause a significant difference on your recovery. You know, it's going to stay off the radar with that for the most part and just kind of train the movement pattern so that you get better at it and stronger over time. So that's really what's going on more than anything else, in addition to just some small accumulation of additional fatigue over time that might cause a tiny amount of growth. But it's not going to be the same as doing actual work sets. All right, next question. Is going to bed really late bad for health, even if you get enough hours of sleep? I go to bed at 4 a.m., but I get 9 hours of sleep on average. Well, the fact that you get a fair amount of sleep probably helps, but what we're talking about here is like your circadian rhythms. I believe that's the term that's used. When people do shift work, which is almost what you're doing, we do note that their hormone levels are different. Things like cortisol tends to be slightly more elevated. They don't produce as much melatonin. Sometimes that reduced melatonin could be slightly less growth hormone production. It really isn't ideal for health. And it's not to say you can't be healthy and do this, but yeah, it does fall into the category of a slightly unhealthy lifestyle. And it's been noted that shift workers in general don't have quite the same health. Humans aren't really nocturnal creatures. We really are intended to sleep at night. And you know, by that same token, though, I would say that people who sleep, who have too much blue light and stuff right before bed or during their sleep pattern and everything else could run into the same problems that shift workers do with all of that. But I mean, the main thing you're looking at is just some of your hormones are going to be a little bit different. And is it a massive deal? It's probably not a massive deal, but it's measurable enough that it's been noted in research and stuff over the years. But, you know, by that same token, if you live an otherwise healthy lifestyle, is it likely to save 20 years off your life or anything like that? No. It's not going to be as bad for you as, say, smoking or eating too much junk food or being overweight or sedentary. Those things are going to be way, way more massive problems in this. It falls under the category possibly minor issues, but yeah, it can affect things like ideal health and ideal performance. It can be a minor problem for those. All right, next question. Hi coach, I'm currently cutting and see that you recommend keeping bulk of calories from carbs. I understand this is to keep glycogen levels high for energy. Does it not make sense to keep carbs at a level to maximize glycogen stores and then get more calories from protein and fats as a natty? Well, I mean, I recommend keeping your carbs wherever you can get away with, but what we need to remember when it comes to glycogen and fuel and everything else, you're not going to have maximized glycogen stores on a cut. Like, what world do you think you're going to have maximum glycogen stores in a caloric deficit? You're not. They are going to be slightly lower. That's one reason we lose water weight in a caloric deficit. So at a certain point, if you're just jamming nothing but carbs down and you're not getting enough protein, you're going to lose muscle. And so the point we need to take home is that you should get enough carbs in to absolutely fuel your training. So if you're going to try to do really high volume training on a cut, you damn well better be carb loading still. You're just going to have to eat a lot more calories. So that's kind of the crux we get into with this whole trying to do really high volumes of training when you cut. That ultimately means you're going to have to eat more calories, which is fine. But you know, that is what it comes down to. You're simply going to need more carbs so that you can have the carbs to fuel that, and the high volume training isn't going to create a larger calorie deficit. It's going to require you to eat more, which is fine. I mean, a lot of us want to eat more food when we cut. But alternatively, yeah, you could up your protein considerably, and that will still handle muscle glycogen. It will preserve muscle well and everything else. But I think for most people, they need to keep that in mind, is that the amount of carbs that you consume, your ideal amount, is going to be dependent upon your training volume. It's going to be dependent on how much protein you're eating. And so to say, is it best to do this or that? I'm going to say no. It's really going to depend upon the circumstances of your energy turnover, your metabolism, your training, your protein intake, all of that. These are all different factors that you have to look at. It's one strategy that can be used successfully, but just make sure that your protein is also high enough if you want to retain muscle mass. All right, next question. Pope here. Explain to the kids why doing compound movements explosively is crucial in gaining strength and power. Obviously, you and I are at the ripe age of 41, didn't get to this level of jackness doing baby weights and non-explosive movements. Yeah, there's a degree of truth to that, and I think most of us who've been training a long time understand that. Hopefully anyone with years and years of training experience or who's coached people realizes that all your smaller movements with lighter weights are there for refining. You're not going to put on much size doing those. You're just not. In fact, even things like your biceps, your big compounds are building most of your biceps. Your curls are just adding a little bit of hopefully extra stimulus, get a little more growth, because, you know, it's a muscle you want to grow a little bit faster. Same thing, your chest you're going to put the size on it from your big pressing movements and dips and things like that. But yeah, as far as lifting explosively goes, yeah, lifting explosively recruits more muscle fibers. That has been proven in study after study after study. That's not even a point of contention anymore. And hopefully, a lot of these kids can understand that more muscle fiber recruitment has more growth potential. All right, so moving a weight as quickly as you can under control, so explosively, is obviously going to give you more potential for growth. And, you know, if you can move a heavy weight pretty fast, yeah, a lot of muscle fiber recruitment. And you can do it repeatedly. That's a lot of volume with maximum muscle fiber recruitment. And yeah, that is the fastest way to get jacked. And if you're doing it any other way, you're going to plateau a lot more. You're going to run into more roadblocks, and it's just going to be a harder journey all around for you. So yeah, people should absolutely be focusing on the big movements, heavy to moderately heavy weight, and lifting them as quickly as possible if you're trying to get as jacked as you can without having to blast a bunch of gear. All right, next question. Hey coach, your info is great. My girlfriend is going to try intermittent fasting and upping her protein to cut weight. Besides protein shakes and more chicken, she's not sure what else to include. She also has an issue with water retention, especially the day after heavy lifting, and we're wondering if there's food she can eat and steps to take to minimize that. All right, man, protein. I mean, protein sources, Greek yogurt, other forms of meat. I mean, there's got to be meat she likes besides chicken. Lean cuts of steak, turkey. You know, there's a lot of other choices out there. If you're into pork, there's lean cuts of pork. I'm not a big pork guy unless it's cooked right. So, you know, there's all that to consider. Protein sources should be easy to find. Water retention, I don't know what sort of water retention are we talking about. If you're talking about GI tract bloat, she needs to find out what foods cause that. And that's one of the problems you run into, is that really high fiber foods are great for cutting, but they will also cause stomach bloat. So maybe what I would say is that since she's going to do really high protein and she's going to do intermittent fasting, she might not need to eat large amounts of really high fiber foods like oats and brown rice and stuff like that. She can probably just get lots of vegetables, lean protein, and easier to digest carbohydrates, which will be fine. And anything that maybe makes her bloat, maybe she's got a mild dairy allergy, so she might not want to drink milk. things like that to consider. But as far as intramuscular bloat, like you're thinking of retaining water in your muscles, that's a good thing on a cut. That's going to speed up your weight loss because your overall energy turnover and metabolic rate is going to be higher. So the question becomes, is she worried about a little bit of minor water retention versus losing body fat more quickly? So I wouldn't worry about that sort of bloat. But if it's GI tract bloat, she's going to have to be careful with foods that she's really sensitive to and not eat an enormous amount of brown rice or oats during her feed window when she's doing the fasting. Focus on simpler to digest carbs, lots of protein, and then, vegetables and stuff. But again, that works well because your appetite should be largely controlled by the protein intake and the fasting, and you might not need to consume large amounts of soluble fiber, which is what might be causing her bloat. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.